thank you for being here. If you've ever found yourself staring at a blank page, or if your heart has ever whispered something you couldn't quite put into words, then this story is for you. This isn't a story with plot twists or grand climaxes. There's no dramatic betrayal, no burning romance, no perfect ending. This is a story of unwritten letters, of sentences half-formed in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, of the words we carry but never say out loud. They say writers bleed in ink. But what about those of us who never get the ink to the page? I've written hundreds of letters in my mind. To friends I lost, to a mother I never truly understood, to a stranger on a train I never saw again, to the younger version of myself who thought she'd write a novel by 20, and to the older version of me, still waiting to begin. None of these letters ever made it out, but I remember every single one. This podcast isn't about how to be a writer. It's about what it means to feel like one. To live with a constant ache to capture the world in words. To notice the way light falls on a table. To remember how someone said goodbye. To carry metaphors in your pocket like secrets. So if you're the kind of person who hears a song and builds a story around it, if you write texts and delete them before hitting send, if you feel everything too deeply but can't explain why, you're not alone. This is not a tutorial. This is not a guide. This is a love letter to the quiet writers, to the ones who write only in the corners of their minds. Tonight, I invite you to listen, not to be taught, but to be seen. This is letters I never wrote, but always felt. Let's begin. I was 7 when I wrote my first letter. It wasn't for anyone in particular, just a scrap of notebook paper folded carefully and tucked into a shoebox under my bed. I had watched my grandmother write letters all my life. Her cursive neat, her size soft, like every sentence cost her a memory. So one evening, with a blue crayon and a heart too full, I wrote, "I'm sad and I don't know why." That was it. No greeting, no sign-off. Just those 8 small words pressed into the page like a secret. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't even spelling correct. But it was mine. And in that moment, writing felt like magic. Not the kind with wands or spells, but the quiet kind that makes something invisible suddenly real. Years passed. The letters grew longer. The crayons turned to pens. The shoebox became a drawer. But the feeling never changed. There was something sacred about placing emotion into language. Like turning a foggy window clear just long enough to see inside. I wrote when I was scared. I wrote when I didn't understand. I wrote when I couldn't say things out loud. And often, I wrote things I knew no one would ever read. People think writing is about being read, but sometimes it's just about release, about letting your heart exhale after holding its breath for too long. If you've ever written something just to feel less alone, even if you tore it up afterward, then you already understand. We don't write because we have something to say. We write because something inside us refuses to stay silent. And sometimes just writing "I'm sad and I don't know why" is more than enough. I fell in love for the first time when I was 15. Not the kind of love you confess with flowers or grand gestures. It was the quiet, aching kind, the kind you only admit to in your journal. His name sat in the margins of every notebook I owned, hidden in the loops of letters, the space between math problems. I wrote him letters every week, folded and sealed, tucked into the same old drawer that once held my childhood crayon notes. But I never gave him a single one. Not because I didn't mean the words, but because I wasn't ready for them to be real. You see, there's a strange kind of safety in the letters we don't send. They exist in a world where nothing goes wrong, where rejection is impossible, where we get to say everything without ever facing what might come back. Those letters became a version of me I didn't yet have the courage to be. Braver, clearer, bolder. And even though he never read a word, I think somehow those letters helped me love him more honestly, because they allowed me to love him without fear. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had sent just one, but most days I'm glad I didn't, because those unwritten stories, they still belong to me. My mother wasn't a writer, at least not in the way people think. She never published a book, never kept a blog, never read poetry out loud. But every night, after the house had gone quiet, she'd sit at the kitchen table with a battered leather journal and write. I used to watch from the hallway, too far to read her words, close enough to feel them. She never let me see what was inside, and I never asked. Years later, after she passed, I found her journals boxed neatly in the attic. Dozens of them, every page filled in her small, looping handwriting. But I didn't open a single one, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Those pages were her way of surviving, her way of being seen, if only by herself. And maybe, not all stories are meant to be shared. Some are written only to give shape to silence. She taught me that you don't have to be a writer to write. You don't need readers. You don't need the right words. You just need a moment and something worth remembering. When I turned 23, a friend gave me a blank leather-bound notebook as a birthday gift. "Fill it with everything you're too afraid to say," she wrote on the first page. For months, I didn't touch it. There was something intimidating about that kind of invitation, to be honest, completely with no filters. But one night, during a winter storm, I lit a candle, sat on the floor, and began to write. Not polished sentences, not clever metaphors, just fragments, memories, dreams, regrets. I still think about the girl on the bus with the green scarf. I don't know how to forgive myself for leaving. I miss someone who never even stayed long enough to be missed. The notebook slowly became a home for every version of me I didn't show the world. It reminded me that writing doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to heal anything. Sometimes it just needs to hold things. And in that holding, something shifts. You feel a little less alone with your own story. That notebook is still only half full, but it's the most honest book I've ever written. Loss has a way of sharpening memory. After my grandfather passed, I found myself writing about him constantly, as if capturing his laughter on paper might somehow keep it from fading. I wrote about the way he whistled while making tea, how he called every bird outside his window friend, how his hugs made you feel like the world had stopped spinning for a second. I wrote not because I didn't want to forget, but because forgetting felt like betrayal. Sometimes, I think we write for the dead as much as we do for the living. To honor, to remember, to continue a conversation that grief tried to end. Words became my offering, my way of saying, you mattered, you still do. I've learned that the pen is not a cure for pain, but it is a companion through it. And when the ache gets too heavy, writing gives the weight somewhere to go. If you've ever scribbled a name just to feel close to someone again, you understand. Writing doesn't bring them back, but it brings you back to a version of yourself that still loved with everything you had. There was a stranger once. We sat across from each other on a train that cut through foggy hills. She was reading a book I loved. I was pretending not to notice. She looked up, smiled, and for a moment, longer than a glance, shorter than a memory, we saw each other. We didn't speak. We didn't exchange names. But something passed between us. Something quiet and rare. After she got off at the next station, I pulled out a receipt and scribbled a note on the back. I hope the ending makes you cry. It made me cry too. I never gave it to her, but I still have it. Tucked in a journal, yellowed and worn. I've written entire short stories based on that 3-minute meeting. Invented a life for her. Imagine she kept that book on her nightstand for years. Maybe she even remembered the boy on the train who didn't speak. Or maybe I was a flicker she forgot by morning. It doesn't matter. Some encounters are made to stay unfinished, and some words are meant to live only in the minds of those who write them. But that note, those 13 words, they remind me that even brief moments can leave behind paragraphs. That writing doesn't always require a reader. Sometimes it just needs a heartbeat. I used to dream of writing a novel. I'd picture my name on the cover, the pages smelling of ink and possibility. I told myself I'd start when I had more time, when life was quieter, when I was wiser, when I was ready. But years passed. Life never got quieter, and readiness never really arrived. Still, I wrote. Little things, lines in the notes app, letters never sent, ideas jotted down at 2 a.m. when the world was asleep. It took me a long time to understand that being a writer isn't about finishing the book. It's about choosing to keep writing, even when no one's watching, even when the words feel clumsy, even when you're scared they won't matter. We live in a world obsessed with completion, with publishing, with proving. But the most honest writing? It happens in the in-between. The half-done, the forgotten drafts, the sticky notes on your fridge. And maybe some dreams aren't meant to be published. Maybe they're just meant to be written, again and again, as long as the heart still whispers something worth capturing. If you're still here, thank you. You've just listened to a story made of fragments, of letters never sent, of words never spoken, of feelings that refused to be quiet. Maybe you saw a piece of yourself in them. Maybe you remembered a letter you never wrote, or one you wish you had. This podcast wasn't meant to teach you how to write. It was simply a place to remind you, you already know how. Because writing isn't only about the sentences we shape. It's about how we feel the world, how we carry moments, how we turn silence into something that breathes. So tonight, or tomorrow, or someday, when the ache returns, write. Even if it's messy, even if no one ever reads it, even if it's just one sentence whispered onto a page, because some of the most important things we'll ever say are the ones we never speak aloud. Thank you for listening. This was Letters I Never Wrote But Always Felt. Until next time, keep your heart soft and your words close.